Hello everyone, and good evening to you guys in India. Welcome, or thank you for being here for our lecture today on hardware and system security. That is kindly held by Arun Jain, who is a system security architect at NXP. Before we start with our lecture, just something briefly about the organizational aspects. So we have around 50 minutes for the lecture and then 10 minutes for Q&A. Please post your questions into the chat function, and then afterwards I will just present them. But no spam. So please restrict yourself to the questions in the chat function. And we try to leave on time today, like within an hour, because we have the Q&A for the sessions afterwards. But only the students that really have their respective game will have to attend. And with that being said, Zane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leonard. Let me switch on my camera and share my screen. Can you confirm that I'm audible, visible, and my slides are visible to you?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining for this session, Hardware and System Security. This is being conducted by NXP Semiconductor, and it's part of the Dutch Cybersecurity School. So let me see. Yes. So this is the agenda for next 1 hour. I'll give a brief overview of who we are as an NXP. Then I'll briefly touch upon why security is needed in the systems that we build. I hope that you would have seen this why security topic in multiple previous sessions of this school, so I might quickly go through that. Then we'll come to the main crux of the session, where I will talk about what kind of hardware attacks that can happen on the silicon products. Then what are the typical security goals and attributes that we need to think about while building any typical SoC system. And then I'll go talking about some building blocks, and then how do we design a secure SoC? How do we build a SoC which can be used in a system which requires high level of security? And then I'll give some call to actions, wherein I'll give some of the future directions which can be taken as future work by researchers, students, and the professionals. Okay, so this is about NXP, wherein we are 60+ years old company. We are leader in security solutions. We have been building various security solutions for e-passport, government IDs, payment solutions. We are leading in that. We have about 34,000 people across the globe, across 30+ countries. And within that, there are close to 12,000 R&D members who are expert in building SoCs, as well as their respective drivers and bare metal softwares. It's a Dutch company. I would guess that you would know it's headquartered in Eindhoven in Netherlands. Primarily from a business perspective, we build silicons. We build bare metal software which can be used on those silicons, and then we sell those systems to OEMs for building the applications. And the application could be in domain of automotive, industrial and IoT, mobile and communication infrastructure. Within these 4 pillars, automotive and industrial IoT are the main contributors from a business perspective. And of course, when I go through the technical topics, you will realize that why NXP thought leadership on security is helping automotive and industrial IoT as an industry. Coming to India, so we have been here since 1969, so very rich presence. We have 4 offices, 4 R&D centers across India, in Noida, Bangalore, Pune, and Hyderabad. We have close to 3,000 employees across 4 sites, and out of that, major presence is about the R&D engineers, apart from few support engineers. And of course, we have been contributing, and almost all India has been contributing in almost all the products being developed by NXP as a global company. So I think this is should be very obvious to this audience why security is needed in any kind of an application, because every application nowadays is connected. It has a lot of private data involved in that operations, and of course many of the command control communication things are governed by these IoT applications. The one of the things that I want to highlight is that you know if I take an example of automotive industry, so safety has been a requirement for probably 4 decades or so since beginning, and security wasn't a technical requirement for building automotive products. But nowadays when we talk about safety, so even if a safety is a requirement, if you want to ensure that car is safe, cybersecurity is needed so that if there is a hack onto the car, then it doesn't compromise the safety. So de facto, the security becomes a foundation requirement even for the devices where safety is needed. Another aspect is the reliability. Let's say we have an IoT embedded system which is used in, let's say, medical industry, or let's say power plants, power grids, or water treatment plants. Those needs to run reliably throughout 24 cross 7. And if you want to ensure the reliability and availability of the services of those kind of systems, again, the security becomes the foundation technology that needs to be embedded to ensure the reliability and availability of the services. So basically what I'm trying to say is that regardless whether we think that security might be needed or not, but even if the orthogonal requirement are there, safety and reliability and availability, security is essential for building those equipments. These are a few famous attacks that has happened on IoT, on automotive systems, which has been captured in media thoroughly. There have been, news in terms of, what kind of compromises uh, have been used to mount these attacks. So, of course, these are not very greatest slide, but yes, this will give you a glimpse of the importance of the system that you use on daily basis, and every those many of those systems are critical to you for your daily life, and those needs to be having a security implemented in the design. Okay, so now let me talk about the technical stuff that for which we'll spend next 1 hour. So to appreciate, why security needs to be built, let's talk about what kind of typical attacks that happen on the silicon products. And when I'm referring product, it's a silicon on top of that bare metal software driver, and typically a application. The application could be any IoT application or an automotive application. So majorly, we can divide the attacks in 2 categories: remote and local. Remote attack, if I can give an example, let's say if I'm able to hack your digital watch that you are carrying on your wrist, uh, when I'm sitting at my place and you're sitting at your place, then this is an example of the remote attack. I don't need, as an attacker, I don't need access to the device. I can somehow able to intrude in the system remotely and then compromise the functionality. Other category is the local attack. Local attacks typically require physical proximity to the device which is under attack. Within the local, there are 2 categories. One is logical, another is physical. So logical attacks are such which basically, where we can connect to the device logically. It could be USB port, LIN port, UART port, Ethernet port, Quad SPI, or any other, typical standard port. And by sending some malicious messages, by using the legal protocol onto the system, legal communication protocol onto the system, I'm able to come as an attacker, I'm able to compromise the device. The next category is the physical, which is the one of the most interesting from a hardware perspective, and also interesting from an NXP perspective, because when we built our systems, many of the systems require to have the countermeasures against even to the physical attacks. So in these kind of physical local attacks, the physical properties like the temperature of the chip, the electromagnetic radiations, electromagnetic emissions, or the voltage profile of the chips on the pins are used to compromise the device. The compromise could be in terms of the leakage of the information from the security system of the chip, or it could be tampering the operation. So if I connect to the real system, real example, by using these properties, I can steal, attacker can steal the private information. Let's say if this device is operational in automotive system from a car, or can temper the driving assistance systems, or a braking system onto the car. So both kind of things can happen by these kind of attacks. On the remote site, needless to say, whenever you read, you do Google about the cyber attacks, you will find most of the things are flooded with the remote attacks because they are scalable. They are relatively require less expertise to mount the attacks, and it is also it's relatively man by virtue of sharing some basically the weaknesses on the software side. It's relatively easy to mount. Logical attacks are the next level, which requires a bit more sophistication in mounting the attack, and of course the local physical are further complicated. Let's look at some specific examples. On the logical remote side, replay attack, buffer overflow, eavesdropping, denial of service are the typical thing. If I can talk about denial of service, so you would have heard, factories going out of service by virtue of any ransomware attack or any other attack. So these kind of are the examples of the remote logical attacks. Interesting remote physical attacks are row hammer or cache timing. I think Spectre and Meltdown must have been read by this community. This was probably a decade back attack on Intel chips, wherein the cache operations were used to steal the information. It was well researched and well published as well. Rowhammer. So Rowhammer is also a very interesting attack, wherein what happens is, let's say if I'm having an SoC silicon piece, wherein the memory onto the chip is partially marked for security core and partially marked for non-security or application core, then what can be done is that, let's say I have a logical separation which is marked properly, and there's no way that application core can access to the secure memory. But by using this row hammer technique, what an attacker does is it will do the write and read operation to the memory of the chip, wherein it will access the application core and do the read and write operation. Now, if we do the million times of read and write operation, because of the physical property of the memory sitting onto the chip, the memory array, which is sitting beside to the application say memory, will also get changed. And that is how we will be able to change the value stored into the secure memory. So it's basically by writing to the non-secured memory, we are able to change the content of the secure memory. So this is also a very interesting attacks which have been well published and well acknowledged in many various published attacks. By the way, feel free to stop me if there are any questions, or we can take at the end as well, because I'll not be able to see any questions. So I hope. Okay, chat is closed for everybody. So okay, so we can take the questions at the end. In terms of the local logical attacks, where the access to the device is needed, uh, we talked about connecting attacking device onto the JTAG interface, USB, Ethernet, LIN, UART, or any other logical interface. We can introduce the messages on this interface and then compromise the security if these interfaces are not properly protected. Now comes the most interesting local physical attacks. So within this category, I have listed 8 major kind of the attacks which can be mounted on a silicon. Power analysis. In this case, when any operation is getting executed on a silicon piece, an attacker can observe the power profile of the device and can potentially deduce the keys which are being used in that operation. This is a non-invasive attack. That means the attacker is not tampering the operation of the device. It is just observing the behavior of the device and then stealing the information based on that. Timing analysis. So let's say the when the device is built in a fashion wherein if two operations, there are two statements. One is if statement and then else statement. And in the program flow of that device, if a statement takes, let's say, has a check if the password is correct, then do something interesting. And else statement says spit out an error. And execution of this is if a statement takes more time as compared to the else statement, then also by virtue of introducing many inputs to that operation, illegal inputs, and by virtue of measuring the time of the execution of that process, it is possible, theoretically possible, to extract the information, extract the keys. Electromagnetic analysis. So every chip will emit electromagnetic radiations while operation, and one can use those information to extract the information. Now, in terms of the invasive attack, where the intention of the attacker is typically tampering the operation, tampering as in, let's say if I want to uh, tamper the braking operation of an automotive device, or if I want to, as an attacker, want to tamper the communications of a country or the airport system or flight operations. So these are kind of a tampering of operations. In these kind of thing, if an attacker has local physical access, then there are various kind of attacks that can be mounted. So voltage glitching, the device can be taken and then glitch can be introduced onto the pins of the chip. Reverse engineering, this could be typically for stealing the IP of the vendors, wherein we can reverse engineer the entire chip. I'll give some examples how we do it. Delayering, micro-probing, these are another techniques through which the security can be compromised. So this is an example of reverse engineering. Let's say we have a chip, the silicon chip, the polishing, microscoping, and image stitching can be used to recognize the structures of the chip. Then within that, if there are tools which can interpret those structure in terms of the algorithmic interpretation implemented on them. And there are open source tools like dgate, which can be utilized to do some of the steps in this reverse engineering. So there are various kind of interesting attacks that can happen on the silicon, and those are interesting from a security architecture perspective because we need to ensure that the whatever the countermeasure we place onto the chip, those are able to resist these attacks. This is another view of those attacks. So if you look at the right side of the slide, this represents the remote attacks. Typically, the generally the identification of any vulnerability for mounting remote attacks is relatively cheaper. And once the vulnerability has been identified, is very scalable. So one exploit can be used to compromise multiple devices onto the uh, field. If I go on to the left most side, this is a local attacks, which typically requires high level of expertise, very expensive to identify the vulnerabilities. And even if vulnerabilities have been identified, it's typically allow you to exploit one device and not very easily scalable. Of course, this is not a this is not going to fit for every kind of remote attack and local attack, but this is the generic profile of various attacks, remote and local. Of course, there are examples where remote attacks is not scalable, or there are another examples where local attacks are also very scalable. So both kind of things has happened, but this is a generic profile. Okay, so among these, we will talk about physical local attacks because I'm sure that in other sessions you would have seen other kind of attacks in general. Various are covered in the software sessions as well, but we'll talk about the hardware things. Okay, so let's see, a tip, one of the mechanism to compromise devices. And let's see this an example from a Pentagon pizza attack. So as you know, Pentagon is an US military headquarters, wherein let's say for every normal evening, it is ordering 12 to 15 pizzas for probably the staff that is stationed during the evening hours. And it is, let's say somebody notices that one particular week, instead of the 12 or 15 pizzas, the Pentagon officials happens to make use, orders, more than 12 to 15, maybe 36, 45, or 50 or 100 pizzas, different from the regular pattern. So what does this tell us? This had happened. This is a real example. This had happened in 1990, and it after a week, the Panama Gulf War started. What, how this is linked to the number of pizzas is it could happen that during the previous week of the Gulf War, Pentagon officials must be having meetings overnight or planning for the attacks, or a lot of officials over there, and that is why more number of pizzas were required. And just by looking at the pizzas and without any official press announcement, theoretically the information got leaked out that the something is cooking up in Pentagon, and which later turned out to be the Panama War. So this can be called out as a simple pizza analysis, that we analyze the number of pizzas ordered by the Pentagon, or differential pizza analysis across the thing. In the if I bring back this to the world of the hardware, it's a simple power analysis and a difference power analysis. That means an attacker can read out the power consumed in any operations while the chip is in operation, and by virtue of measuring the power profile, it is theoretically possible to the system can leak out the information. And the very interesting part about these kind of side channel attacks, that these could be non-technical. And even in this PISA case, it's not related to military, it's not related to, stealing the information, going inside Pentagon or things like that. But even, this number of PISA leaked out the information. So it's very interesting that we have been, as a security architect, when we build a system, we need to just not think from a technical perspective, but what are the non-technical aspects that can be utilized for side channel attacks. The next example for a hardware attack is the acoustic cryptanalysis. So as you can see, the red circle shows a victim laptop, and we have a mic placed over here and a system which observes the sound produced by the victim laptop. And let's say we have a 4K bit of RSA implemented in this victim laptop, and we believe that it's a very high level of security, crypto security, that we have built into the laptop. But by virtue of measuring the sound produced during the operation, it is possible to deduce the key which is used in the RSA decryption operation. And this is a well published paper on this. So this is another example where it's possible that any kind of a side channel information can be utilized to leak out the information. So we have to be very careful while building the systems. So how can we protect these kind of side channel information? And this is a food for thought, and we'll try to cover a few of the things in later slides. Timing attacks. This is wherein, let's say we have a program flow wherein program starts, and the second step is password matching. If it happens to be success, then process one gets executed, which takes, let's say, the more amount of time in execution, which is represented by the size of the block. And if the password doesn't match, then it fails. And the process two, which takes less amount of time in execution. And then, of course, both the process, both the end stops. Now, if we have this kind of implementation in any device, then this is also not a security hardened solution, wherein when I say security hardened, it means that it is possible theoretically to leak out the information from these kind of implementation. So again, what we can do to prevent the leakage of information, because typically this is a very typical example you will find in C files wherein the process one, which is a useful process, takes all the good things and then takes a larger amount of time. So this is perfectly fine from a functional perspective. It can get implemented. All the functionality are good. It will be, even from a safety perspective, it is fine. It is reliability perspective, it is fine, but it is not fine from a security perspective. So we have to see what we can do to prevent these kind of leakages. So those were the examples of side channel analysis. Just a time check. Okay, we are halfway. Now, let me talk about some fault injection attacks. Let's say we have a program flow implemented on a device, on a chip, wherein if the pin is correct, pin is not correct, it will throw an error. If pin is correct, then of course the program, if it is implemented for, let's say, ATM kind of a machine or a credit card machine, then it will spit out the money. Now, if I'm able to attack this device and exactly attack on the point when the pin is being checked, then theoretically the check can get bypassed, and even with the incorrect pin, the program flow can go towards pay money, and then it will spit out the money. So I'm able to, let's say, using the voltage glitch attacks or the laser glitch attacks to to interrupt the process and then take out the money. So these are a few examples of the real attacks, and then Okay, so now let's see, what are the typical security goals, and we'll then come to the secure SOC. So many times we think that, our devices could be made very, perfectly secure, wherein there should not be any possible to, leak the information or tamper the operation of the device. But that's not true. There is no such thing as a perfect security in a real world. This can be just shown with this cartoon, wherein, let's say, I have built a system which has $1 million implementation of a 4 kbit RSA implementation, and I believe that this is very high-end security I have built, and now it should be very secure, and now no attacker should be able to mount an attack to this. Yes, that's true. If I would try to mount an attack by breaking the cryptography, then probably it's a very tough thing to do, and I might take ages to mount an attack. But attacker can use different techniques. As an example, uh, buy a $5 wrench, hit the owner of the laptop, and get the password simply, and then steal the information whatever is there on the laptop. So basically, having the strong implementation on one aspect, but not covering the full aspect, is also not so good. So there is no perfect security there. We have to think from various dimensions to while building a security. And this is also establishes a statement which is very, very common in the cybersecurity world, is security is as strong as the weakest link in the system. And in this cartoon, the weakest link happens to be the physical security of the individuals who's owning the laptop. Now, what do we do? So, as in security architect, security suppliers, we need to balance the cost and benefit. Basically, if the device is protecting an asset of $1 million, the security countermeasures that are built into the system should be of that high grade that it should take more than $1 million to compromise the security. So that if an attacker tries to break the security, is spending more than $1 million to get the information of $1 million, which probably is not good from his perspective, and the motivation will not be there. So it's basically, even as a security architect, we need to balance the cost and benefits, because we know that there is no perfect security in the world. It's an If I connect with the real example, so you typically might be locking your house, but when you lock the house, you don't make that fortress. You make a balancing. You make a balance call that okay, this much of 5 lever or 10 lever lock is good enough for my house, and that's protecting my assets in my house. So we always make these kind of a trade-offs. Another interesting aspect of a hardware security or any kind of a security attack is that the attackers will always do what a vendor or a product provider will not want it to do. Every silicon product that we build, we always specify the boundary conditions, that the device is operational until this temperature, it can withstand this much of voltage supply. But whatever we mentioned in these data sheet, the attacker will try to compromise, will start, tampering the device beyond the operating condition. So hackers obviously don't obey the rules. So as a security architect, we need to build the solutions which needs to withstand uncontrolled and evolving environment. So next is about, when we talk about building the security, protecting the device from this attack, then what do we need to do actually? So we need to build five attributes. First one is the confidentiality. It is easy to understand. It's basically keeping the data secret. As an example, if the device is supposed to have medical records stored, then we need to ensure that security measures doesn't allow the leakage of the medical records. Another attribute of security is the integrity. If the device is controlling the financial transactions or automotive applications, then the security countermeasures of the device should prevent any tampering of the data that is being processed. Authenticity is about knowing from whom the data came. So let's say you have a mobile device with you and you have seen the software updates, the OS updates that comes once in a while, once in a month or so from the mobile vendor, then you as a user will not be able to ensure that the update that is being sent is indeed being sent by your mobile vendor, and hence the system, the mobile has to have the implementation that it can check the update has really come from the vendor. So authenticity is ensured by the mobile vendor itself in the implementation. Then non-repudiation is about you cannot deny any transaction happened in future. So whatever has happened, it cannot be denied in future that did not happen. Availability is the fifth one, wherein the access to the data or service should be there in case of as part of the security countermeasures. Typical examples are the communications. The mobile communication should continue to work. The airport services, the flight operations should continue to work even if there is a security attack. So the security countermeasures that should be built should be, considering the availability aspect of the service being offered by that system. So these are the basically the attributes, the goals that should be kept in mind as a security architect for building, the secure SOC. Now, now, how do we build the confidentiality into the system? This is an example. I'll not spend much time onto it. I'm all 40 minutes past. So, this is an example. How do we build this confidentiality wherein if let's say Ram, who is the sender, wants to send a confidential letter to Sita, who is the recipient, and there is a Ravan who is the ill actor, the bad actor who can see the message, then how do we ensure that even if the Ravan has an access to the message, then also it is not able to deduce what is being sent from the sender to the recipient. So encryption is the classic technique to build the confidentiality, wherein the sender basically encrypt the message and then send it out to the channel. Channel could be the Wi-Fi channel or the Bluetooth or any other wired communication as well. So this has been built into the system, and then onto the recipient side, because the key is shared between the recipient and the sender. The recipient, who is the Sita, will be able to decrypt the function and can read out the exact message what is being sent. And now, even if the Raman as a bad actor has access to the channel, it will not be able to deduce what is being sent. So confidentiality is ensured by implementing the encryption of the message. So encryption is, will look like this. It will basically change the content by virtue of the ciphertext. Typically, encryption technique can only ensure the confidentiality. That means even if the channel is compromised, can be tapped, the message cannot be decrypted. But encryption is not sufficient from an integrity perspective. It is not sufficient from authenticity perspective. And that is why we'll require different techniques. I'll skip this part because of the time, but yes, there are other cryptographic techniques which can be used to ensure the authenticity. Of course, the digital signature is another example to implement the authenticity. Yeah, we'll be sharing this slide and recording so you can refer all these things. Now I will come to, you know, how do we build a secure SoC? So as an NXP, I talked initially, we provide silicon for a variety of application in automotive and industrial. So we need to build something onto the SoCs to ensure that whatever the attacks that we talked about, they cannot be mounted onto the systems that NXP delivers. And of course, this is not specific to NXP. Every silicon vendors who is providing the chips for who is providing the system for secure applications, a typical architecture will look like this. So this rectangle the square shows the simplified block diagram of a system on chip SoC, wherein we will have multiple cores. It could be RISC-V, it could be another vendor cores which are supposed to run the application. A typical SoC will have the code and data memory in terms of the SRAM, fuse, flash, MRAM, RRAM, or any other technology. We'll have interfaces to the external memories like quad SPI or other memory interfaces. The SoC will have communication peripherals like LIN, UART, Ethernet, um, and USB, JTAG, and any other typical communication peripherals. And of course, a bunch of system peripherals for clock module, debug module, reset controllers, and things like that. And all these are interconnected by something called system interconnect, which is a fabric which basically allows all the master cores to access all these contents. So this is a typical SoC architecture. If I need to build any application on top of it, this is sufficient for building a functional application, but may not necessarily be the security hardened application. If one has to add security to this SoC, one possible implementation choice could be to add a security enclave. Security enclave is a hardened block, which basically is very high, which has a firewall implemented within it. It is not accessible by the application core. It is not accessible by communication peripherals directly. It it controls the application cores, it controls the memories and even the communication peripherals, but nobody controls the security enclave onto the SoC. Typical functionality of this hardware block, which I'm calling as a security enclave, would be having the root of trust, which could be manufacturing root of trust as well as the runtime root of trust. And I will give what do I mean by those things. It ensures the confidentiality, trust, integrity, the goals that the security attributes that we talked about is implemented implemented as part of this enclave, and it's provide the cryptographic and security services to rest of the SoC. So this could be one of the possible architecture for an SoC which needs to have the security implemented within the hardware. Now let's see, when I say root of trust, which is one of the important aspect of the security implemented in the SoC. So, when a silicon vendor builds an SoC, it stores some secrets, which is called root key, in the RTL, in the silicon, in the boot ROM, pre-tape out. And then those secrets can be used to, so these secrets are embedded within the silicon before the tape out. And now those, when the execution happens post tape out, when the silicon is there, now silicon is executing, those secrets are used to authenticate the secure bootloader. So bootloader. So typically, if a secret is stored in the silicon, it is very hard to steal because it's part of the silicon implementation, and it's also very hard to tamper that. So that is one of the greatest security storage that one can utilize onto a typical IoT or automotive application. So that secret is used to authenticate the bootloader, and now the trust is transferred to the bootloader. When I say trust is transferred, what it means is that the trust which was there onto the key is now transferred to the bootloader. That means I've authenticated the bootloader and now it can be trusted to execute the steps. Now the trusted bootloader can further authenticate the trusted OS. So this is the typical boot execution flow that I'm talking about. And now the trust is transferred from the bootloader to the operating system. And now the OS can authenticate the application running onto the system, and the trust is transferred to the application. And this is how a silicon root of trust mechanism can be used to run and authenticate the trusted application. And that is how the typically, the mobile devices or the laptops or, typically the any high-end security embedded systems will actually boot. So this is a very interesting implementation where the trust is transferred and the authentication process ensures that we are running only the authenticated application, not the malified application. So in contrast to that, if let's say instead of the authenticated application, an attacker tries to run the unauthenticated code, then the trusted OS will try to verify that malicious application, and that verification will fail, and the trusted OS will not mark that as a trusted application and will not let that application run. And that is how the system will prevent itself to not execute any malicious application. And in this chain of trust process, the security anchor is sitting into the chip itself, which provides the trusted authentication, trusted execution to the entire application layer. So this is another view of that similar of the same thought process, how a simplified secure boot flow can execute on an embedded device. So this green box represents a typical silicon. The left box is, let's say, the security enclave, which we saw in the previous SoC architecture diagram. So when the chip starts booting, the first step is the chip checks whether the secure boot is enabled. If so, then it will check the firmware getting executed onto the security enclave. If it is found correct, then the application core comes into the process of the execution, and then it will verify the application and then run the application. So this is how typically any system which has the security implemented onto the silicon will execute. Just a time check. Okay, so I'll skip this part. So this is an example how a secure update is implemented on a device. Secure update is what I talked in example. The mobile vendor keep on sending the operating system updates and the application updates to the our mobile devices. Okay, so we talked about various attacks and the fault injection attack, but we did not talk about what do we need to do in the SoC, in a typical SoC, in a typical hardware to prevent these kind of attacks can be mounting onto those devices. So I'm giving few of the countermeasures that can be chosen to be implemented onto the hardware devices. So first is the secure access control. That means we logically creates the firewall within the SoCs so that the secure secure storage is only accessible to the security enclave and not to the application interfaces or to the unauthorized interfaces. So logical separation of the secured and unsecured component onto the SOC. Another example of the countermeasure is anti-timing attack measures. You remember that we talked about password matching and having the process of different execution time for the pass and fail execution. Then for preventing these kind of an attack, we can employ clock jitter mechanisms. That means the clock which is used to feed into the circuit which is executing this process can have the jitters, can have the noise, so that the process execution process time is indeterministic and randomized. One can implement the dummy cycles. That means the process 2 theoretically can have some dummy operation, let's say the NOP operations, which can extend the execution duration of the process 2 to the same as process 1. So it will do the wasteful activities from a function perspective, but it will do good things from a security perspective, and the process 2 execution time can be theoretically made by adding the dummy cycle, same as the process 1. One can have the dummy instructions, or if the operation is cryptographic, then we can have dummy rounds. So in typical cryptographic operation, there are rounds to implement those algorithms. So we can have multiple additional dummy rounds to prevent this kind of timing attack. Then another example of the countermeasure is logic shuffling. So we can randomize the execution order of the secure sequences. That means if the process takes, let's say, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 10, then instead of this defined execution steps, if the algorithm allows to shuffle those steps within the implementation, then one can have the execution order shuffled. Let's say after step 1, one does the step 10, and then step 5, and then again back to step 3. So by randomizing these execution order, one can obfuscate the power consumption patterns of that operation. Another countermeasure one can implement is the error detection and correction mechanism. So ECC kind of thing or CRC kind of a thing or hash checks can be implemented to keep on checking whether the data sitting onto the memories are correct or have been tempered. One can have environmental monitors. So, we can implement temperature monitors, the clock monitors, the voltage detectors to identify the fault injection attack. So let's say if somebody taking the chip and mounting an attack onto a voltage pin of the device and it is tempering the voltage. So if there is a voltage detector which can see the voltage is falling or falling or rising very quickly, if there is a voltage detector implemented, then it can identify that there is some tampering to the device, so I should stop the operations, maybe uh, you know reset the device, and things like that can be implemented to prevent the leakage of the information. So we give this example of an attack wherein the voltage and the tampering can be done to take out the money. Another countermeasure could be the logic redundancy. One can have the operation, multiple operations running onto the chip for same operations, and we can measure the output of the both logics and see whether both the main logic and the redundant logic are giving the same answer or different answer. If there is an attack, then it is likely that the secondary logic will, or the primary logic, one of the logic will go haywire and will not give the same result as compared to the other results. And that is
Just
how.
to step in there, I don't know. I think we have got 5 minutes left. So I just want to give a little bit of time for the Q&A, if that is all right with you. We have a couple of good questions. Thank you very, very much to begin with for this amazing lecture. It was really interesting, and I really enjoyed especially kind of like seeing the differences between the local and the remote. It was eye-opening for me. So we've got a couple of questions. One person, anonymous, is asking what groups are most at risk for local attacks? It seems like there would be much less that they would be much less widespread than remote attacks. So what sectors are most at risk for local attacks?
Yeah. Yeah. So before I answer that, just allow me to wrap up this in a minute, and then I'll
Of
take that
course.
question. Yeah.
Of course, of course.
Okay, so these are the measures that can be implemented to prevent these attacks. And another example of the countermeasures for reverse engineering is, let's say I have a storage which onto the chip, which stores the keys. One can have the encryption implemented onto that, or obfuscation, sprinkle logic onto the layout of the device, so that it is not easily readable. Similarly, for RAM, for NVM, we can have the sprinkle logic, and then it's easy. It's a difficult to mount an attack. Now, just to call to action to this audience who is young, energetic in terms of and I believe it's a young professionals and the students and various cybersecurity enthusiasts. We need to, as in security builders, we need to build optimized security for edge applications. We have been having various security countermeasures, but the cost of them is very high. We need to have a reduced cost of the security measures. We need to build more hardware countermeasures because software countermeasures are typically not so robust and also very costly in terms of performance, in terms of the cost of implementation. We need to think from a new technology perspective, chiplet architectures, in-memory computing, the post-quantum operations that are happening, what kind of attacks that can happen in these kind of new era, and what are the countermeasures that we should build. And of course, the AI is changing the landscape, not just for the hacker, but also the security enthusiast to build a new kind of security countermeasures using the AI techniques to improve the detection, prevention, and as well as the resilience to the system. And if you have any questions, we can take them now. And yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Do you want me to quickly repeat the question? Is that
yes?
Yes. So they were asking what groups are most at risk for local attacks, and I like kind of in that what sectors are most at risk.
Okay, so one example could be, let's say we take any automotive application. Okay, if I buy a car from a vendor and use basically compromise the one of the chips used in the car, and now I have stolen some information which I can utilize, and of course I need to have the local physical access to the device to, let's say, mount a sophisticated onto the car. And now typically the vendors will use same kind of a code in entire fleet of the car, and now I use that information to mount a remote attack to the multiple cars. So or even the automotive application, even to mount a remote attack, I might be interested in mounting a local attack first, and then stealing the information, and then mount a remote attack. Similarly, for financial sector, I can take the credit card and the debit card or e-passport of a kind of an application. I can steal some information, which so when a chip is built, when an application is built, the vendor will typically reuse the code that is being used across the millions of devices. If I'm able to compromise one device, I can use that information to mount attacks to various devices. So this is examples of few of the sectors which will be critical from a local interface, local attacks perspective.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was a really, really detailed answer. So thank you very, very much for this. I do see that unfortunately we are running out of time. We have the next session straight after this. So usually I think it would be okay to go a few minutes over, but unfortunately we have to be quite strict this time. So thank you again very, very much, Arun. It was really great that that you and that NXP could come to the cyber school and to give this wonderful lecture. So thank you very much. To the students, we next have 2 of the challenge Q&As, so challenge 1 and challenge 2. So you only need to attend if you are assigned to either of those challenges. You should have received an email about that a couple of days ago, your allocation. And then we have finally tonight at 7:30, I believe, we have the last game session with Michel Rademacher. So quite a busy schedule today, but we hope you can make it to all of them. So once again, thank you very much for coming to this lecture now, and we'll see you all soon. And thank you again, Arun. Bye-bye, everyone.